So were you thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts?
Yes, this was very, very clear.
Tonight, still no word from the palace in the response to the claims by Meghan and Harry. How damaging will this whole episode be to the monarchy? The royal interview painted a picture of the racism, isolation and imprisonment that Meghan felt here. Is that an image the palace recognises, and how should they respond? Also tonight, the US presidential envoy John Kerry talks exclusively to Newsnight about climate change and why Biden's administration believes it will win back trust on this issue.
Why? Because he's dealing straight. He's not tweeting his policy. He's calm. He's showing leadership.
Hello, good evening. It was hyped, pre-trailed and publicised, but when it came, it still had the power to shock. The allegations made by Meghan Markle paint a picture of a young woman who had her personal freedoms removed, her skin colour discussed and her version of events dismissed. Harry described a Truman Show-like existence, long trapped in a world he couldn't escape, pitying of his father and brother still in it. In any normal family row, you'd now hear the other side, their explanation of all that past. But this isn't a normal family row or a normal family. So instead, for now, we get silence. And what are we meant to do with this asymmetric warfare? Any young woman who speaks so publicly of her suicidal cry for help clearly needs it. Any prince who worries about his safety and family security probably needs it. So what happens now? Can the palace insiders ignore it, move on? Will they launch their second inquiry in 2 weeks? Or are they regrouping, rearming to unleash their own account of what happened, which may be just as unpitying? Seema Kotecha has our report.
Every family has tensions. This is nothing new. But this family row has led to what looks like a permanent breakup. And now an interview, nothing less than explosive, has exacerbated that schism.
Good morning, America. Bombshell revelations.
It was always likely to be bad, but in the end, it was
The
worse.
astonishing questions about Archie's skin color.
Jaw-dropping revelations, claims of racism, neglect, and being cut off from the family.
In those months when I was pregnant, all around this same time, so we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
They painted a picture of an institution that was archaic and controlling, at one point pushing the Duchess to the very limit.
So were you thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts?
Yes, this was very, very clear.
Wow.
Very clear and very scary. And, you know, I didn't know who to even turn to in that. These are the thoughts that I'm having in the middle of the night that are very clear.
Clarification.
And I'm scared because this is very real. This isn't some abstract idea. This is methodical, and this is not who I am.
The palace is likely to be dumbfounded, but it will be difficult to ignore such incendiary accusations by a family keen to be seen as representative of the Commonwealth and a modern multicultural country. Of course, this isn't the first interview.
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him.
To leave viewers wondering,
But I was very let down.
where this takes the royal institution.
You threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham.
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend.
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
He got on one knee.
But with Meghan's arrival, for many it felt like a renaissance. The young were in town, and with them they brought modernity, diversity and hope.
She really is beautiful, isn't it?
It was a significant moment. A woman of colour now firmly embedded in one of the world's most famous families.
Thank you. I mean, I have the two best guys in the world, so I'm really happy.
That optimism didn't last long, though. Relationships became fractured between those they were closest to, and the media got wind of a situation far from harmonious. They said they found it too much of a burden to carry.
Our hope was to continue serving the Queen, the Commonwealth and my military associations, but without public funding. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. I've accepted this, knowing that it doesn't change who I am or how committed I am.
With the move to Los Angeles came the opportunity to tell their side of the story, and Harry discussed his strained relationship with his father.
I feel really let down because he's been through something similar. He knows what pain feels like, and Archie's his grandson. But at the same time, you know, of course, I will always love him. But there's a lot of hurt that's happened.
Of course, this is just their version of events. The voices of those at the centre of the allegations remain silent. But what the royal family does or doesn't do next is likely to dictate whether this turns into a full-blown storm for the British monarchy or just a passing squall. The magnitude of the claims makes the latter very unlikely.
Seema Katecha with that report. Well, joining us now, Hugo Vickers, the royal biographer and broadcaster, Wendy Osefo, the assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Education and star also of The Real Housewives of Potomac, and Emma Dabiri, broadcaster and author of the upcoming book, What White People Can Do Next. Emma, I'm going to start with you, if that's OK. The interview has just finished airing here, and when you saw it in its totality, what was your overriding impression?
I mean, it's incendiary. There was so much speculation about how much was going to be revealed and what was going to be said. And I really think fundamentally, like, what I'm shocked by is not the fact that Meghan experienced what she experienced, but rather that we are all so shocked that that's what happened. You know, I think this kind of speculation and concern about Archie's complexion and about his race, essentially, whether or not he will be able to, quote unquote, pass as white. This is not something that comes as news to many of us. And I think, like, what is really what's really difficult and stops us from progressing and having the generative conversations that we should be having about race is the way we get mired in this really basic, oh my God, I'm so shocked. It's racist. It's not racist. It's racist. It's not racist. We have to understand there has to be a honest and truthful reckoning with English and British history. And from the 1600s, from 1661 in colonial Barbados, when the English invented and codified into law the idea of a white race and a black race, that then spread to Virginia, throughout the Americas and across the world. This idea of central to that construction of a white race and a black race was the idea of white superiority. And that was key to justify the enslavement of Africans that was happening in those English colonies. And that sense of whiteness that actually is relatively modern. This is early modernity and is something that is relatively recent. This idea of whiteness became a cornerstone of Englishness.
Right.
And with that, you have that belief in a biological superiority. So this is something that is this is just throughout society. Of course, it's going to be deeply potent and present in the upper echelons of the British establishment. And I don't say this in an accusatory way. I simply say, I say that we just need to have an accurate understanding of history, you know?
Let me go to Hugo Vickers to pick up on some of that. Just stepping back for a second, Hugo, do you think that this has shifted the dial? Because there were a lot of people in the lead up to this who felt that Meghan was, publicity seeking, a drama queen. But with the stories that are now coming out about the baby's skin colour, about her suicidal thoughts, Harry's description of himself as kind of a Truman Show type hostage, does it change that perception?
Well, I think that the problem, of course, came when they left for Canada and then later on to California. They actually opted out. And I think, it's a great pity that they did, because for all that we've been hearing this evening, I mean, they were both of them very, very committed to the Commonwealth, and they could have done an immense amount of good within the system. And the system is very fluid, and they were both very, very committed to it, or so it seemed. I can't help wondering why they wish to air all these things out in California now, and I assume that this is partly to promote new enterprises that they want to do and so forth, to re-establish themselves as new figures outside the royal family.
Can I just pick up on that? Because in the interview, Harry actually says that they tried to step back, not down, that they offered to go to Australia or South Africa or the Commonwealth and actually carry on doing their work just as not senior royals. And it's this image that the royal family mishandled that you're left with from his words, that the institution just sort of told them to pick themselves up and brush themselves down and get on with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be a lovely idea if they actually could have fulfilled that, but I don't think that's actually what was seeming to be happening. I mean, they were, he says, well, you step down, you step back. I mean, they were off, they were going away, and they wanted also to be, if you remember, completely financially independent, and that inevitably meant to say that they would go into a commercial arena, and that's very unattractive for the royal family, just as it is if they go into a political arena. It's very important that they should keep away from politics, and unfortunately, both Harry and Meghan, for obvious reasons, have gone into both those areas now. So, I mean, the Queen, on the other hand, I assure you, has been, and even Harry has said this himself, incredibly generous and kept the door open for them and gave them every option to come back if they wish to do so, has obviously been in touch, sending presents to the grandchild, Zooms with Prince Philip, all those things. I mean, that certainly didn't happen. I'm speaking as a historian. When the Duke of Windsor abdicated, it was very much he went into the past tense.
And I think they recognised that, didn't they? They said they had the utmost respect and love for her. If I can just go to Wendy, Sefo, what do you believe this has done to brand Britain in America? Do you find the American population staunchly behind Meghan and Harry, or is there divide there too?
There is some divide here in America. We don't have one, ideology when it comes to this. But what I do think it says that racism does not reside solely in America. It's also across the pond. What we have here is an institution which has, years of being idolized from Americans, almost a fairy tale. And then you have this woman of color who goes into this establishment. So many Americans were tuned into the television to watch the wedding of Harry and Meghan, only to find out that her fairy tale is actually a nightmare. And it happened rather quickly. So the whole issue of, her having suicidal thoughts and the mental breakdown coupled with the skin.
Wendy, we've just lost you. We'll come back to you when we get that established. Emma, if I can pick up with you here, what impact do you think this will have on people of colour in the UK? Because there was so much, as Seema was explaining, sort of investment of people's hope and the optimism at the beginning. It did seem like this incredibly welcoming, incredibly celebratory moment. Can that be preserved, or do you think we've sort of gone backwards?
Well, I think strategically it hasn't been handled very well. I think Meghan was an incredibly powerful symbol of, could have been leveraged as an incredibly powerful symbol of post-racial, inverted commas, Britain, of a multicultural, progressive country, to have this woman of African descent, who's the descendant of slaves, married to Prince Harry. I think the racism would have still been there because it's so present throughout society. But I think she could have symbolized change that had allegedly happened, irrespective of if it had happened or not. And in terms of what it reveals, I think it's quite fascinating. I think it shows that we really haven't come as far as some of us might believe we have. The conversation around Archie I think really needs kind of a little bit of closer consideration. And it makes me think of basically what we're dealing with here is hypo-descent. And that was, again, something that existed or was invented, during slavery, whereby if you had any Black ancestry, you were classified as Black. And that was happening because so many of the enslaved population, of which Meghan is a descendant, so many of the enslaved, and Archie is, so many of the enslaved population had so much white ancestry that it threatened the status quo. But if they had any Black ancestry, even if it was, a far lesser amount than their African ancestry, they would be classified as Black. And if Archie makes me think of Archie's parentage makes me think of, someone like Thomas Jefferson, who's the president of the United States.
Right.
He has children with an enslaved woman who's 3/4 white and 1/4 Black, if we're going to look at those kind of percentages. And those children are enslaved, and they are not seen as white, even though they're 7/8 white. If you look at Archie and the concern around him, it's very similar. A very powerful father, a mixed mother of African descent, but still concerned that he's not white.
Hugo, I want to pick up with you because for Harry and Meghan, clearly it was very much about race and racism. And yet Harry also said this other line, which was he saw history repeating himself. He saw an evocation of what had happened to his mother, Diana. I wonder if you think that a lot of outsiders really struggle with that institution, whether it's Diana, whether it's Sarah Ferguson. Every newcomer seems, and I'm not saying they had Meghan's experiences, but every newcomer seems to be sort of, you have to have the sort of the charisma or the corners shaved off so you can fit in.
Well, I don't know. Some of them have been very successful. I mean, the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton, has been extremely successful. Sophie Wessex has been very successful. And of course, in the course of history, there have been many, many other examples. People like the Queen Mother, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So, there are one or two, obviously, where it goes wrong. I think one of the problems with Prince Harry is that when he was a very little boy, he saw his mother, and I understand this, as a victim. And he was too small and too young to protect her. So, of course, when Meghan Markle said that she was a victim, he immediately leapt to her defence. I'm not quite sure that she was a victim in the same sort of way. And can I just take this opportunity to clear up one really serious thing that she said, which was actually very misleading. She said there was a discussion about whether Archie would be a prince or not. There can have been no such discussion. I could bore you to death with exactly who is a prince and who isn't. But it's absolutely clear cut. And that is how she led into that whole issue. She was almost saying that, slight implication that he couldn't be a prince because of the possible colour of his skin, which is a bit naughty, I think.
Let me come back to you, Hugo, but I want to bring back Wendy because you were cut off just in your flow, Wendy. If I can ask you to pick up whether it has changed the view of Americans towards Britain or towards that institution, because the monarchy is such an important part of our soft power.
Absolutely. I think that for Americans, when we think of the monarchy now, we think of an institution that is flawed. In America, this summer, we just went through the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of George Floyd. And what we see is when we see this monarchy, we see an institution that we revered. And now we find out that you guys have the same issues of racial and racism and systemic racism that we do in the United States. So yes, it does hurt us. It almost seems like a fairy tale shattered for many of us. And when it comes to, there was a comment about Kate Middleton was welcomed into the monarchy and other people, Fergie, were welcomed into the monarchy. The truth of the matter is that when it comes to Meghan Markle, she was not given the same chance. When Archie was born, there was a reporter that posted something of, two individuals holding a monkey, referencing Archie as a monkey. When you are a woman of color, when you are a Black woman, you face different types of microaggressions. Any woman of color knows exactly what Meghan Markle is referring to when she talks about these microaggressions of you being deemed as a villain, while Kate Middleton is being viewed as, this person who is a hero. Right. So yes, there is underlying issues within the monarchy.
Let me go back, Hugo, for a last word. We haven't had a response from the palace, and I don't know what we should expect, because silence is what they do best. Would you expect there to be, I don't know, briefings? Would you expect there to be a statement? Where does that come from now?
Well, I don't see Buckingham Palace as being like the Kremlin, and on the whole, they're a very civilized organisation, to be quite honest. And I also don't think that they are likely to engage in a kind of war between two parties, which of course the tabloid press would greatly enjoy. So I think we're more likely to see dignified silence, quite honestly.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now, one of the first decisive moves Joe Biden made as president was to rejoin the Paris climate deal. The second, arguably, was to create a post of special presidential envoy that signalled just how seriously the USA was taking climate change by appointing the former Secretary of State John Kerry. In his first UK broadcast interview, the special envoy told Newsnight that the 20 countries responsible for 81% of all emissions now had a particular responsibility to step up their ambition, and that America would announce its own targets by April the 22nd. Well, I sat down with him in central London a little earlier today, COVID social distancing firmly in place, I should add, and I began by asking him what addressing climate change should look like in practice.
Well, it means that the scientists have told us very clearly that we have to take certain steps. We have to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions at a certain pace in order to be able to hold the Earth's temperature increase to 1.5 degrees and in order to reach net zero emissions by 2050. That time period is the area within which we have to act. Now, if we don't act right now in this next decade, we do not have the ability to hold it to 1.5 degrees. We lose the ability to have net zero by 2050.
Do you think the UK is being ambitious enough? You've been speaking to your counterparts here today. Paris and Brussels have been praised for their target to cut emissions by 55% on 1990 levels. Are you seeing impressive leadership here?
I think Europe as a whole, and obviously Britain now, UK stands on its own, but UK has a very ambitious target. UK should be applauded for the fact that it has already reduced a certain amount. Significantly, coal has been reduced in this country for a long period of time now, and you have been deploying new technologies. But you still have a very high level of reduction target, which is 68%. That's higher than Europe as a whole. The United States is going to make its announcement at the summit that President Biden will hold April 22nd. But all of us, every single country, has got to step up ambition, and particularly the 20 countries, of which UK is one, but the 20 countries that are the equivalent of 81% of all emissions. Those 20 countries have a particular responsibility to take the lead in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. That means China, the United States, Russia, India, Europe as a whole, EU, and then a group of other countries, Korea, Japan, and others, all have to be part of this effort. 20 countries, 81% of the emissions.
We don't know the US targets yet. Is it imperative that the US is the most ambitious of all? Do you feel like the world leaders on this one now?
Well, it's imperative that the United States step up with a very realistic and achievable, measurable level of our reductions, and we will. President Biden will make that announcement either on April 22nd at our summit or in the week preceding. But there's no question the United States has been absent from this effort for the last 4 years, at least as a federal government, even as states and mayors continued to stick by Paris. But the problem, Emily, is that even if every country did what it had agreed to do in the Paris Agreement, even if they did, and they're not, then you would still see a rise in temperature of the Earth till about 3.7 degrees. That's catastrophic. And since we're not, it's actually rising higher.
There are still plans here for a coal mine in Cumbria. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think generally speaking, the marketplace has made a decision that coal is not the future. I mean, all over the world, coal plants are closing. All over the world, people have made a decision to move to cleaner fuel than coal, which is the dirtiest fuel in the world. Even a supercritical coal plant is dirtier than other plants. So the marketplace in America and elsewhere in the world they're not funding. You go to any normal bank, most banks will tell you, we're not going to fund a new coal plant. No investment firm is going to invest in a new coal plant. So I think the future is very, very clearly in the new technologies, in alternatives and renewables, and the world is going to grow very significantly around this new market as new fuels come online, whether it's hydrogen, longer battery storage. I mean, they're just exciting things happening.
The message from your administration is we're back. How do you get the Republicans on side? How do you get half the country when Republican lawmakers are still reluctant to believe in man-made climate change? And after Donald Trump pulled out of Paris, how do you win back that trust?
By putting in place policies that are based on common sense, on truth, facts, evidence, and dealing very directly with people about those choices. I mean, President Biden's recent legislative victory with respect to the COVID bill has 70% support or something very high in the United States. The president himself has 60% support. That's unprecedented in recent times. Why? Because he's dealing straight. He's not tweeting his policy. He's calm. He's showing leadership.
You use this phrase, dealing straight. The UK is dealing with its own trust issues right now. The EU is expected to begin legal action against the UK for its unilateral decision to breach the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Irish government warned last week that the UK government couldn't be trusted on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Your thoughts?
I'm not going to be sidetracked into other issues that are not inconsequential, but they're just not within my lane right now. And I want to stay focused on the climate issue.
I guess what I'm asking is, it comes back to trust. If the EU says this speaks to a wider issue of trust in our partners, and we feel that's missing at the moment, we're hosting COP26 at the end of the year. How does that play out if partners don't trust us?
Well, again, there are individual issues that are always going to arise between nations. That's for certain. But I think it's important that the EU and UK work at solving whatever that difference is. It's between them, not us. And my job right now is to try to help organize folks on this great challenge of responding properly to the climate crisis.
What about China? That will be critical to the success of COP26. What is your message to China right now? Because the last administration was condemning it for the treatment of Uyghurs, calling it genocide. You have to decide whether you put human rights above green issues.
No, I think that we don't. I think we never displace deep value held universal principles. But we have to obviously speak to China, talk to China, work with China. 30% of the world's emissions come from China. China is a great nation, a powerful nation, a big economy, has enormous influence in the world. It is impossible to solve the problem of climate crisis without China being at the table and being an important partner.
Just before we end, we're talking on a day that has been dominated by the Harry and Meghan interview. We know how important the monarchy is to soft power. Does anything in it that you've read, any of the accusations of racism or the sense of the attempted suicide, change how America views the institution of our monarchy?
Well, first of all, I have not seen the interview, and secondly, I wouldn't comment. I don't think it's appropriate to comment on royal family relationships. I will say this for certain. As a senator, as Secretary of State, as the climate envoy, we have enormous affection and respect, not just for the crown, but for the royal family, for the things they work for. HRH Prince Charles has been a terrific leader on climate and sustainability issues. I think that we have a strength in our relationship that is much, much bigger than an interview or a moment in a family. And I think it's important to put that family and the relationship that we have between our countries in its proper perspective, which is we are strongly, strongly linked together with, I think, unbreakable bonds, and I have great respect for that relationship.
John Kerry, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Well, as March the 8th finally rolled round, the country was full of the sound of sweet, joyful laughter filling our streets. Let's be honest, it was mainly from parents discovering for the first time since Christmas what it was like to stop homeschooling, send their kids out of doors and rediscover their own jobs and lives. Despite their best efforts, the education of many of our children has suffered badly in lockdown, and today is the first step in England on the road to catch up. So what needs to happen now to help them all? Katie Razzle has been in Swindon.
Today's date then, Monday the 8th of March, first day back for you all. Title for today's lesson is, what challenges did Elizabeth face from abroad?
Elizabeth I may have had her challenges, but so too have pupils up and down the country over the past months of homeschooling and lockdown.
Parliament was made up of the House of Commons and the House of... Liam? House of Lords, well done.
School life may look a little different, but today was a return to familiar surroundings. At Lydiard Park Academy in Swindon, all year groups were back in class this morning.
Yeah, it was absolutely lovely. It's the job that we all signed up for, to actually be in front of pupils, actually teaching them face to face instead of a camera, a laptop.
This school has rattled through more than 1,500 lateral flow tests since last Wednesday, so they can have all pupils back today, unlike most English secondary schools, which are phasing return.
Well done. If you want to put that face down in the tube for me.
It's all right. It just feels a bit uncomfortable.
Does it make you feel more safe?
Yeah, it does.
There's a sense of urgency here, a belief that while the children are resilient, they've missed out on a great deal.
We wanted all the pupils back on the very first day. I spoke to one pupil who came in last week for her testing, and she said, I said, how is it? Are you glad to be back? And she said, yes, sir. She said, apart from my family, you're the first live person I've spoken to in a couple of months. So it's fantastic that they're back.
Now it's a question of making up for lost learning after 8 long weeks of online school. The year 10s and 12s could be the first to take exams if their GCSEs and A-levels go ahead next year. One pupil we met has a suggestion for how to catch up.
It'd be nice to have like a little reduction in the amount of topics we've got, or topics like individually in the lessons that we'll be doing, like splitting, like instead of doing 7 topics in like 2 tests, we do 5 topics in 2 tests.
That idea is echoed by staff who agree it would be fairer on the COVID generation if they were given time to catch up by being taught a little less.
I think that it is essential that the government consider cutting some of the content back. I think if they were to cut one particular topic and allow us more time then to consolidate the learning over lockdown and then teach at a sensible pace moving forward, it will also give the pupils the confidence going into the exams that they need.
Lydiard Park's Year 8s are tackling life skills, pizza making and, perhaps a little late for parents frazzled by endless catering, washing and clearing up. Katie's pleased to be back, except for one small detail.
It's quite good, a bit strange though, as we have to wear masks all the time.
Yeah, what's that like?
Oh, it's really sweaty and hot.
There's a recognition here that catching up is about more than teaching core academic subjects, and that mental health has suffered.
I know people who have struggled, and it's been tough on everyone, but for me personally, I haven't struggled too much. It's just the fact that it makes you feel quite lonely, really, when you're in a room all day just staring at a computer screen.
It's like mentally changed how I feel about school as well. Like, I used to be like, oh no, like school, like say it was like Sunday, I'd be like, oh no, school again. But this Sunday I was like, I'm really excited for school because it's like I haven't seen anyone for ages and like really looking forward to seeing everyone.
What are the challenges, do you think, that this generation, this group of children here will face coming back?
I turn it on its head really, and I think, there's a lot being said about what's been missed, but there's also been some really positives of the learning in lockdown. For instance, prior to the pandemic, we were really worried about pupils' independence, their resilience, and what they got from their community. And this has made them a lot more resilient. They've had to be independent.
What's felt most unusual being here today isn't actually seeing children in masks or swab testing. It's been watching them running around, socialising, all that richness of school life that we used to take for granted. It's almost as if a switch has been flipped back to normality. However, nobody is pretending the past months won't have had consequences. We just don't know the full extent of them yet.
Katie Razzle there, and we're joined now by Professor Becky Francis, who's Chief Executive of the Education Endowment Foundation, an independent charity that studies the links between family income and educational achievement. And Professor Francis, if you just take us back, first of all, what point are these children starting at? How far behind, on average, do you think they are from the lockdown?
Well, as you were just hearing, Emily, of course, kids have experienced the pandemic very differently. In terms of, for example, their region, their school, their social background, and of course their individual circumstances as well. But overall, we know that there has been learning loss and of course a gap in the attainment gap for socially disadvantaged pupils over the period of the first lockdown particularly. Our own evidence at the Education Endowment Foundation, a study conducted with the NFER, showed that there has been 2 months learning loss for pupils in reading and maths. This is 6 to 7-year-olds, primary school children, and a growth to around 7 months progress between disadvantaged pupils and the rest. And those findings are being supported now by other studies. So being able to take time to think about productive support for recovery and of course to take an evidence-based approach to that will be very important.
Yeah, 2 months sounds bad, 7 months sounds terrible. What do you think the best catch-up is then? I mean, is it about longer school days and shorter holidays? Do these sort of structural tweaks make a big difference?
Well, there's a real temptation, Emily, to go for catchy or sort of easily attractive sounding solutions. But actually, those solutions often aren't based in research evidence and, of course, can also risk exacerbating pressure on teachers and on pupils at an already challenging time. So it really is important that we go for the approaches that are going to be most productive. And all the research shows that it's actually supporting high quality teaching that's going to make the most difference to supporting pupil progress. That's actually doubly true for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. So supporting CPD, retention and support for teachers to stay in the profession, practical things like supporting diagnostic assessment as kids return to school, clear explanations and that targeted support. It's not catchy, but it really will be what makes the big difference in supporting kids. And at the EEF, we recommend a tiered approach. So first of all, supporting high quality teaching, as I've said. Secondly, supporting targeted evidence-based approaches that we know are effective. For example, tutoring, high-quality programs around literacy and numeracy, supporting transition, and so forth. And then thirdly, wider strategies that ensure that kids are ready to learn. Right. So that might be about pupil well-being and mental health. It might be about social and emotional learning, or of course it might be about behaviour and attendance. But that holistic approach will be doubly important at the present time to really support young people in a well-rounded way.
Professor Becky Francis, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. We're going to leave you with a big spread of tomorrow's papers. You could probably guess what they are uniformly leading on tomorrow, but with different expressions. The Daily Express, so sad it's come to this. Daily Mail, what have they done? The Daily Telegraph, the Duchess has shown courage, says Joe Biden. The US perspective on that from the President. The Times, palace in turmoil over Meghan's racism claims. The Mirror, the worst royal crisis in 85 years. And The Guardian, palace in crisis following again the devastating racism claim. That is all from us for tonight, but thank you for watching. I'll be back tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.